introduce yourself. So I'm going to follow your lead here. I'm currently the Senior Manager of Inclusion and Diversity at MITRE Corporation, and that has been my role for the last 5 weeks. But before that, I was working in I&D across a number of different associations, most recently the Consumer Technology Association. I am I hate saying this, 38-year-old female in Arlington, Virginia, originally from Egypt, and I am wearing a pink shirt, and my background is blurry because nobody wants to see what's in my background. But I'm excited to be here with y'all today.
Thanks, Heba. Welcome. And I should have mentioned this. Visual descriptions and introductions are an ongoing practice, and they're something that we're trying to spread more widely in the virtual community and also place-based communities. But don't feel like it's important for you to say the exact same thing as the person that went before you. Visual descriptions are all about whatever you're comfortable with sharing. So Heba, I'm sorry, I should have said that first. You didn't have to tell us how old you were. You can use whatever you'd like in your visual description. So Tim, let's hear from you.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. Tim Hopkins, Senior Consultant at McKinley Advisors. It's a strategic consulting firm located in DC, Chicago, and the virtual space like everybody else over this last year plus. I've been in the association world for over 16 years, mostly on the association side. I spent my first 7.5 years at a trade association in the healthcare space, and then I spent the last 8 years before I joined McKinley last year at a professional association, the International Association of Fire Chiefs. When I joined the Fire Chiefs Association, my role has largely been effectively the CIO of the organization, but I also have done work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And I'm very proud of the work of the incremental steps forward. And that's what this work is, as you all know, of helping to make a dent into the progress, making some progress forward at that organization. And since I've been working at McKinley just over a year and 1 month now, I've really got to help organizations on their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, helping launch different programs, help them review governance and structural things and all that fun stuff. So happy to be with you all here today and excited for the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And Brian.
Hey, thanks, Nate. Brian Haney here in Washington, D.C. My true full-time gig is the world's most embarrassing dad. That is what I get to do day in and day out. A bit self-avowed by my wonderful 12-year-old daughter. But I also masquerade as the founder and vice president of the Haney Company. Our firm is proud to be the only financial services firm that has not one, but 2 CAEs running it. So we specialize in kind of insurance and financial solutions for associations, been doing it for a long time. My business partner also happens to be my father, and he also happens to be an ASAE fellow. So I think we love living and breathing associations and supporting all of the work that the association community does because it is so critical. But I also like to say I'm not just consultants and we live and breathe this stuff, but I'm of the association community as well. I'm members of several industry associations and do a lot of volunteer work, leadership work, et cetera, because my industry, the financial services industry, is one of several great examples of an industry that needs some DE&I help. So it was just great to share this kind of a passion of the work that I'm doing in my personal space, my professional space, and now the association community at large. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us to all 3 of you. You're all amazing professionals in the association environment, so it's wonderful to have you here today and to hear your insight on DE&I as we talk about this really important topic that is really salient for all of us today. So just to get started, I know I asked all of the participants as they were joining to tell us why DE&I is important to them, and we sort of know the obvious reasons why DE&I is important. But I'm wondering if each of you, first we'll start with Heba, then we'll move to Tim, and finally Brian, if you could tell us why DE&I is specifically important to you personally.
Yeah, so personally, I think as a woman of color, that's an immigrant, that comes from all of these underrepresented and marginalized backgrounds, it's important to me on a personal level. And I always, and I'll say this here because I think it's a safe space. There's the professional DEI practitioner, Heba, that sits in the association world and does this work on a daily basis. But outside of work in my personal life, I feel like I'm also militant Heba. So I'm really passionate about social causes, youth causes, and things like that. And it's always kind of that balance in the workplace. Professionally, I think it's really important because always I found in all of the work that I've done for the past 12 years doing DE&I, especially in associations, people look at it as like, oh, it's a nice to do, right? It's that thing that's like that silo over there that we always bring out to showcase when an issue happens or when we want good press or we want whatever. But it's really a really strong business function. And if you assess what the organization is doing really well, there are some DEI aspects in each of those running really well programs. And so it's important to me because I think if we harness the power of DEI, we'll get really innovative organizations that don't just move the needle, but like go to that next level of like, how can we be the best and really create strong impact in the world?
That's great. That's really great. Thanks, Heba. Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Heba. That's really important. That part of it where taking organizations to the next level, that's a motivator in my realm. We had an exercise yesterday doing do strength finders as a discussion topic that we've used at our organization. And one of mine is futuristic. Like I'm always concerned with, like, I'm looking forward often in the tech space, but also just everything with the way Heba mentioned it, just taking orgs to the next level, looking at barriers that are getting in the way of innovation. Sometimes just looking for tensions in organizations and how they function in their strategies, that something's missing, that they're not focused on, that maybe it's in a blind spot. Like I care passionately about that stuff. I got into the DEI space. My passion comes from being half Black. My dad's Black, my mom's white. And having to grow up with this kind of intersection of this identity that it was always, I'd have conversations, someone looks at me and says, "You're Black." And then I go, "I'm half Black, I'm half white." I go to family reunions on my mom's side, on the white side, and growing up getting called terrible names, including the worst of them. And then on my dad's side, going to family reunions, and it's just being a completely the other side of the coin. And so me struggling with, I want to retain both of those identities, and I don't want to have to choose. And that has always been a motivator, to say my identity is what I claim and not what somebody else claims. That passion really has driven me into gravitating towards that in the workspace, to make sure that people inside the office, feel included, that people are at the table. There aren't unintended barriers. I do the work inside the organization, but of course, a lot of my professional work now, what I've done for the last couple of years, especially, is looking at it on the member side of making sure that if there are other people, no matter what their identities may be, if they don't have an opportunity to engage, to help advance the cause of the organization, that, it's a powerful mission. All the associations I've worked for have really powerful missions doing important work. And I don't want them to be stifled without having everybody included. So that's a mashup of the things, but that's kind of what has driven my passion on DEI.
Great. Thank you, Tim. And how about you, Brian?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with the obvious in this safe space. I am a white male from Chevy Chase, Maryland, for those of you that are familiar with the DC area. So it doesn't get more, I'll say it, white privilege than that. And yet my passion is very, very personal, in that my life experiences and the friends that I've had, my best friend from college was a Black guy from Bartow, Florida, which most people that live in Florida don't even know where Bartow, Florida is. It's in Central Florida. It's like an hour outside of Orlando. I've had just some tremendously impactful relationships with people from different groups than me, that really gave me not, a necessarily being in everybody's shoes, but gave me such a window into that, the fact that, yes, the way that I live in my life experience is measurably different than it is for a lot of other people, and it shouldn't be that way. And having just seen that firsthand too many times, with privilege, in my mind, comes responsibility. So I don't know that there was ever this real conscious moment, but I recognize that I have to be an ally because I can be and I should be. And so I have a lot of personal passion formed from just life experiences and having the benefit of wonderful relationships with people who are different than me. And I think now in the professional arena, I want to kind of touch back on what Heba said, that it's a business imperative, right? For organizations, industries, nations, international, we miss so much when we don't have all of the voices at the table, providing input, providing value, providing vision. I know I can point to so many times in my own life where I've benefited so much from somebody else's point of view, from a framework different than my own, that informed mine and made me better and made me grow and allowed me to be better at what I was doing and who I was as a person and as a professional. So I think DE&I for me represents the best of humanity, and we should all, I think it should just want to say, all right, how can we get there? How can we get there together? We're all going to be coming from different places. We're going to have a variety of different kinds of challenges and hurdles, but man, there can't be more worthwhile work to be doing, in my opinion. So.
Thanks, Brian. Brian and Heba, you focused a little bit on sort of the business proposition here and how we can elevate our organizations if we include all of these voices together. Tim, I'd love to zoom in on something you said real quick, just because of a comment that we have in the chat right now. Ryan shared that DE&I ensures the survival of industries and also elevates the abilities of our networks and workplaces, to your points, Heba and Brian. But he also then goes on to say, it also allows us to evolve to a place where everyone can feel a sense of belonging, which will attract top talent. So I know, Tim, you said that identity is really important to you. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to how in our workplaces, we as young professionals can help foster these feelings of belonging and really welcome these groups where DE&I really isn't a task list for them. It's more of an identity.
I totally agree, and I appreciate this. Thank you for bringing that up in the chat here. It's so important. I think right now we've been getting to, I think over this last year of having to kind of pivot from normal lives of, go meeting in person a lot. For me personally and some other people I've talked to, we've had to reflect on who we are and what we stand for, what our values are, and just between that reflection personally and then the things happening in the news that get many of us fired up about these social justice issues, we without a doubt want to work at places that want all of ourselves to be present. I have my history, I have my identity, I have things I'm passionate about. Like young professionals, we want to be able to be our whole selves at work, and we want to make sure the organizations support that proactively. I think I've seen it in a lot of the work I've done and seen how organizations are doing more, say, proactive, like surveys about inclusion, asking these questions. Do you feel safe speaking up? Do you actually feel like this is a place that is welcoming, that is belonging? There's the Association Forum has the phrase, the welcoming environment. Is your workplace that? And a lot of the data says there's much improvement needed. And I think what young professionals can do is, one, set the expectation for the organization that they need to support you as a whole person, and that you are going to help them towards the mission, and that in turn that the organization should support you as who you are and what you believe in. And it could be done in different ways of being proactively engaged in providing feedback and calling things out when it needs to be called out. If, say, something isn't necessarily inclusive, or if there's a process or something within the system that needs to be called out, I think that's an opportunity where young professionals can step up and take this leadership role to say, this culture is something that we all own together. And I want to proactively help improve it to make sure I feel welcome and that I feel like I belong in this place, but also the most talented people out there, they're going to want the same thing. So it's an imperative to the business to do that. And it's something we care about. And honestly, I wouldn't want to work for a place that I didn't feel like I was welcome and that I could be my whole self. So I feel like a lot of young professionals can relate to that.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I'm seeing more and more through this conversation that belonging and identity is really tied to business success and those real business outcomes that Brian and Heba were talking about in the beginning. Heba, I'm wondering if we can tap into militant Heba here a little bit, and you can offer any suggestions in addition to what Tim mentioned for how young professionals can really go about fostering that sense of belonging at work.
I don't know if y'all are ready for militant Heba, but I'm gonna give you a little bit, okay? So the thing that I've been grappling with most recently, especially since 2020, right, as a D&I practitioner, and being in a new role where people are telling me how they want to engage with that function across an organization, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, well, it's the buzzword. It's what's new now. And DEI or DNI or IND or whatever you want to call it has become that buzzword, right? And so we get lost in that pie in the sky, we hope to achieve it kind of thing. But when you break it down, and especially the sense of belonging, right? Diversity is, right? It's the makeup of who we are. Inclusion is the actual act or the verb of doing what it is that we're doing. But belonging is that feeling that you achieve after you successfully do inclusion and diversity right? It's that feeling that people get. But how do you operationalize a feeling, right? And militant Heba wants to show up at work, but is that effective to the business goal and why we're at work? It can be in certain situations, but I won't let her show in all situations if I don't feel that sense of belonging. And so I think it's an organization's responsibility, not just the organization, but everybody that works there that has a role in any part of the association to think about, how do I add to that feeling and that sense of belonging? And so how do I operationalize it? When someone walks into your building, how are you engaging with them? Do you say hello to everyone as you walk in? I mean, that sounds really basic, but someone saying hello to you, if you're new there, or if you feel out of place, or if you feel whatever, if you're having a bad day and someone says hello to me and smiles, that makes me feel a little bit better. It makes my day a little bit better. And it makes me feel like I belong there. I feel like someone cares about me. So I think all of us, whether you're young professional, older professional, whatever, wherever stage you are in your career, you have a role in that operationalizing that belonging and that diversity and inclusion in your actions, in your interaction with people, in the way you speak out. And I think, and I'll just give a really quick example. We were having a brainstorm. I was asked to lead a brainstorm around retention and how inclusion helps retain underrepresented employees in the cyber tech workforce. And the man who asked me to do this, he's from an underrepresented group, but we come in and the group is majority men and a couple of women. And before we go into the breakout sessions, the women talk about microaggressions and like, can you talk a little bit more about that? What exactly does it mean? Can you give an example? So we talk about it and then we go into our breakout groups. And I asked one of the volunteers from the business resource groups to lead this discussion because it was focused on HBCU students. And she was a volunteer helping this manager who asked us to come in and lead this brainstorm session. And she starts talking and she gives a little bit of her backstory. And then he goes, but wait a minute, is that what you're supposed to be doing? Is that what you're supposed to be leading? Aren't we supposed to be talking about this other thing here? First of all, she's a guest. So how are you making her feel? How are you making the other women on your team feel? And what are you doing? And so then he goes to me and he says, right, isn't that what she's supposed to be talking about? And so this is your opportunity, right? As you're thinking, how do I do something about it? So I was like, well, I think she's getting there. So why don't we give her the space to really get to her point, and hopefully she will get to that side. And after that call, she called me and she was like, he literally exhibited a microaggression after we talked about it, but I didn't know. And I don't think people here know how to butt in the way that you did and really guide it and stand up for me. And so thank you for doing that. And so how many times, and I'm like, oh, I just did it, right? But how many times can you have those opportunities throughout the day to really operationalize that sense of belonging? I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent, but you asked for militant habits, so there it was.
Those tangents are absolutely welcome. That's a wonderful example of something we can all look out for and do in our day-to-day work lives, to be better stewards of DE&I as part of a culture and not assignments. You know, I totally hear that buzzword conversation. I'm asked often in my own career, what do we have to do to get DE&I? And it's not something you can get. It's not something you achieve. It's not a box to check or a package to receive or something to put on a shelf as an accomplishment. It's an ongoing culture. And I really think that speaks a lot to how we have to be aware of our environments and continually monitor them for those microaggressions and stand up in those ways. It's interesting you bring up an example that involves standing up for one another and speaking out in those moments. Another conversation that runs in parallel with DE&I and is really important is the thought and the conversation around allies and allyship. And I'd love to talk a little bit about allyship here and how, whether you're a member of a marginalized community or not, you know, Brian and I are both white males. I'm a member of the DELP program. I'm part of the most recent DELP class with ASAE. And I'm the only person I'm the only white person in the group. So for me, allyship has been a personal journey of figuring out how to become the best ally I can be while keeping my eyes open for those opportunities. So Heba, I'm wondering if you could give us some recommendations on how to begin your journey through allyship and how to engage your friends and your colleagues in marginalized communities to be the best resource for them.
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody, but just like I said before, being aware. And Brian talked about privilege and power a little bit, but any one of us in any given situation may have some power and privilege, right? I sometimes talk about and Tim talked about intersectionality, and sometimes I talk about I'm an immigrant, I'm a woman, I'm Black, I'm this, that, and the other. And a lot of times I'm at the bottom of the power dynamic or the privilege dynamic. But I'm also, even though I am an immigrant, I speak fluent English. And so that gives me power and privilege. Or I have a master's degree, so that gives me power and privilege. And so being aware of your power and privilege and in the spaces that you show up, and then using that to, again, speak up or butt in or talk about someone, again, it's that term of being a sponsor, talking about someone that isn't in the room, that you're affording an opportunity, or you're talking about them so that they can get connected to a network or whatever maybe. I think those are ways that you show up as an ally.
Thank you. Brian, I'm wondering if you have some remarks about how to be an ally as someone who's not part of those groups that you're seeking to align yourself with.
Yeah, no, I think that for me, allyship had to become a part of my personal identity first. And I think maybe just as a general encouragement to anyone is that, you know, I always like to say, we never behave unlike ourselves, right? Meaning what's really inside of us ultimately will come out one way or another. So if we really want to do functionally work as an ally or an advocate or anything, we really do need to make sure that we internalize that and make that part of our identity, our makeup, because then it's that much more powerful. And it also doesn't land like we're just there checking boxes or doing something because we think we should, or we want to be seen a certain way. Because I can absolutely say for myself, none of that is true. I've had wonderful life experiences. I've had wonderful parenting, and I've benefited from things that I was fortunate to benefit from, but I did that also recognizing that so many other people that were important to me that I care about, and people that I don't know, don't have that same kind of life experience or opportunity. And that to me is not fair, it's not okay, and it's not right. I want to quickly touch on one of the culture points that I thought was so well articulated by Tim and Heba as well. We all want to be, we should be valued for who we are, not just what we do. And I think that is one area that cuts across all industries, and one place where, when it comes to work, change can start to happen, is that to find a metrics to value each party for who they are, not just for their functional capacity to go beyond works and roles and job descriptions and responsibilities. Because again, have been mentioned it, and then there's tons of metadata that now support this, right? The more valued people feel, the more they belong. If you have a better space for people to speak and be themselves, that culture, Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So if you create that culture, that's really the best genesis for and groundwork for true and lasting change. But if you don't get that culture and you try to do a lot of other change, you find that you're almost working against yourself. And so I want to now swing back to then allyship, right? So as we're exploring our space, whatever it is, our spheres of influence and our capacities, I found that I had to intentionally connect with underrepresented groups that I had the opportunities to have relationship with or connections to. And so since we're all in different parts of the country, that can look very different depending on where you are. In DC, we've got a wonderful, diverse community. So if I wanted to connect with any underrepresented group, it's here, like I could. That may not be the case everywhere else, and that's okay. I think just become aware of what is in your space and in your sphere, and start with the places that are closest to you. Those where you can find, if you don't already have existing relationships, then go foster some. And I think just go in with the mentality, if you're in the privileged class, like I've had to be, going with the mentality of, I need to understand somebody else's experience, because that will, I don't want to go in thinking that I can do anything, solve anything, or come in and be somebody that I'm not. I need to learn. I need to go there with empathy. I need to go there with understanding. I need to create and develop cultural competence. So that way I have a better framework, and I have underrepresented groups telling me what's truth, not what I think is true. Because then I can be empowered when I actually understand, when I don't think that I know, but when I hear truth from somebody else, then whatever steps I can take as an ally, I'm empowered to do that. So I think that that's the other cautionary tale, is don't go in with your own preconceptions or even think that you know what you want to do. Go in and be intentional and try to empathize and understand and ask questions. Ask somebody, hey, what can I do? Can I help? What can I do? Let somebody else tell you what help looks like, because it might not be what you think.
Thanks, Brian. Absolutely, Tim, go for it.
Yep. That was really good, Brian. I think that's so important about asking questions and do more listening, active listening, than waiting to speak. That's so important, because there's different lived experiences and you're trying to find that empathy. One thing that came up this week, we had a training with an outside firm that did some DEI training, and it kind of touches on, we did yesterday, Heb and I led a little social hour for association folks on mentoring. And so one practical exercise I might recommend, that was recommended by person, Emily at Nonprofit HR, was take a look or take an inventory of the last, say, 5 people that you've helped advance in your career, their careers. Say you've sponsored, coached, whatever, you've helped guide them to something. And then ask a couple questions about their identity and how much it's like your own. See if there are any things like, are they all, for me, are they all people of color? Are they all men? Are they all within the same age range? And there's like the little inventory, and I don't have the full exercise with me, but it's just being aware, proactively aware, and saying, okay, why are the last 5 people I helped men? Why aren't any of them women? Why aren't any of any other? They're all Black, or they're not of Asian descent, or they're not of other groups. So just asking those questions and take an inventory of yourself, I think that exercise goes a long way in recognizing how you are proactively, how you're being an ally, consciously or subconsciously. And I just would challenge everybody to take, I think it's called the sponsorship challenge, of just take an inventory of that, and then ask yourself if you can do more in that space to be more equitable about how you're helping people advance in their career, because I think people in underrepresented group need that, especially from allies.
Thank you for jumping in, Tim. That was a great point. And by all means, all of you, feel free to jump in. And, this isn't just a Q&A. This is more of a conversation. And I love the way we're sort of finding our own path through this content. I'm wondering if we could sort of pause here and talk a little bit more about something that I think, Heba, you mentioned first, but I think really runs as an undercurrent in DE&I, which is the identification of power and privilege, and then understanding first how we identify our power and our privilege, but then how we can engage with others, not in spite of that, or actually in spite of that power and privilege, to use it for good. So I'll open this one up to the floor. I don't know who has some thoughts about how to find your power and privilege, and then how to wield it in a way that does good rather than holds back.
I have to. This is something that. One of the critical myths that must be debunked is the myth of a level playing field. So I want to start there, because that was one that I had to overcome and unpack growing up. This idea that because we're in America and the land of opportunity, everybody has the same opportunity. That's not true. That's not true at all. Not everybody is at the table, and even the path to get to the table is harder for some than others. So that part for me always used to touch a nerve when I would start to get into certain conversations, and I would hear people say, with the best of intentions, and I'm sure the best of hearts, that, well, don't we all have the same, we're all free to have the same opportunity, et cetera. The answer is no, that's not true at all. And that's, so accept that, right? Accept that, and then use that as an opportunity to really see things for what they are. So in your space, financial services, right, where my profession, my industry, what are the things that exist in that industry that are known barriers, right? Is everybody as practitioners able to have the same, is it easy for all groups to become practitioners, or is it easier for some than others? Okay, well, what does that really look like? Let's be honest about that, right? Also, what we do for the nation at large. Does everybody have equal access to financial help, resources, et cetera? No. What do we need to do about that, right? So I think, when you come and you are willing to see things for what they are, and not use that to turn around and beat anybody up, but to use that as a common starting place for growth and for work, I think that's really, really, really critical, because sometimes when we don't all get in the room and start from the right place, we never go anywhere.
I'll go. So I'm the type of person that really likes to take these like big topics, or again, really high level topics, and really practicalize it and make it easy to digest. And I'm very action oriented. So I'm like, what do I do around this, right? And so it's like power and privilege, right? And it's, again, coming back to how you're aware. And some ways to be a little bit more aware is the Harvard Implicit Bias tests, which are online. If you quickly go there, if you search Harvard Implicit Bias test, there's a ton of different electronic quizzes that you can go through that will show you your bias, right? And going back to the dimensions of diversity, understanding what all of those different dimensions are and how you fit into them, taking those bias tests to understand where your biases are. And if you see that your biases are higher than in one area than in another, that means you have power and privilege in that area, whether it's race, ethnicity, weight, education, language, whatever it may be, right? If you have more bias there, that means you're closed off and not as aware of how you're moving in that space, because you have been privileged to not have to be aware of how you're moving through that space. And so that's a really kind of tactical way to understand your power and privilege. And then once you understand it better, you're able to then say, oh, I never understood how people like this function in the world. And then start your journey with it and understanding, reading, searching online. Google is your best friend, y'all. Google is a great resource before you actually go to people of a marginalized group or whatever and say, tell me about your life and tell me everything about you. Nobody wants that, right? So do your research and then go and ask people and become their friend. And it's a journey. So it's not like I'm going to do this test and then I'm going to be better. It's a journey that you go on, and it's a skill. It's a practical skill that you have to build and utilize and practice so that you're able to do it better. So that's just like a really tactical way to start, and to even utilize that within your organization, whether it's your team or your staff or your board or your volunteer members. Just really have a conversation about biases, and then power and privilege. And then together, like, right, as a group, come up with ways that people can start using their powers in different areas within your association. So if you're an advanced professional and you're always the mentor, and you realize that, is there a way for you to start mentoring mentors instead of being a mentor, teaching people how to be a mentor, or stop being a mentor and be a mentee, because there's probably some skills you can learn. And that's just a really basic example, but yeah, like that.
That's exactly what this call is all about. It's not just about big strategy, high level, sort of pie in the sky DE&I. This is really about what we can do right now. How do we take control of our own surroundings, our own immediate environments, and then how do we spread those effects and that change further and wider into our community. So Heba, thank you for getting operationalized and down to the details. That's exactly what we want. Tim, do you have thoughts on this you'd like to add?
So yeah, I loved everything that both of you said. And it made me think about something in my own journey, right? It was when I first started out, I was admin assistant and web designer, basically. I came out of school with an information science degree, and I was like, I attempted at an association for 1 week, and then I sat at the front desk, answered phones. And then in that week, I learned this small org, 15 people. I was like, yeah, I want to build websites. And they're like, oh, well, how about if you stay at the front desk, we'll let you manage our website. And I'm like, cool. All right, let's do that. And I stayed at that place for 7.5 years. But through that time, I got to understand what the power structure was. That's why when I would be like, what, these decisions keep coming out of the board meetings. Can I attend the board meeting? And they're like, yeah, sure. Why not? Sit in the back of the room or whatever. I'm like, cool. And then like, well, who gets to make that decision in the process to say we are going to start, stop, or continue a thing? And they're like, oh, you need to be a manager. I'm like, I want to be a manager. And like, this has been my career journey. It's been running into this barriers, if you will, or at least understanding like I would have made a different call there because I think I'd come at it different with a different perspective, and it probably would have worked out. And that continued to be how I got promotions. When I joined my last organizations, I kept getting promoted for the same thing. It was a lot more on the DEI side. I'm like, well, why can't it be done this way? And they're like, well, the person who does that is at that position, that hierarchy. And I go, cool. I will do what does it take to get there. I'm gonna make it happen. And I think that's something that I personally had on my journey of like, that was my kind of struggle. There was a tension there with the power structure that was and how I approached it. And I would often be the only person of color in the room, in the leadership ones, or even on the staff sometimes. And I thought, that should be different. And so I tried to be proactively involved and be getting the leadership role. So that just came to mind as Heba was talking about that when you get into these positions of power, making sure that you recognize what that power is and you use it responsibly. And I've kept that in mind to make sure that when I'm helping others to say, you can be in a manager position, you can get to the C-suite. Don't think that just because you don't see someone at that level that looks like you, don't think that it's blocked off from you. And that's something I'm really passionate about, because we can and will change the power structure with people who care about this and prioritize it and don't just think it's a checkbox like we talked about earlier. And I think having leaders like the ones we're talking about right now, not only get in leadership positions, but bring other people up that care about the stuff we do as well. That's how we change things. But it's a long journey, but I mean, we're all here, or we're on it together. And I think supporting one another is how we stay on our feet and how we keep moving. So that's all.
Tim, as if we practiced this, that's a perfect segue into where I sort of want to take the conversation next. So we've talked about how this is all a very personal journey and how we have to start within ourselves and then work out to our circles from there. And And Tim, you're talking about how, Danielle makes a great comment in the chat, lift as you rise, sort of bring people with you on that journey as you achieve more powerful positions, then use that power in mindful and deliberate ways. I'm wondering, for those of us in environments where we're not the leaders, we're not the decision makers, I wonder if you all could talk, maybe we'll start back with you, Tim, if we could talk about how we approach organizational leadership to have these conversations, or to begin having these conversations, or if they're from a place where they know DEI is a buzzword and it's something they should focus on, how do we move the conversation from buzz to action to measurable results?
Oh, I love it. It's one of my favorite topics, going from the words into action. Yeah, so it depends on the organization and where they are on their DEI journey, on what your approach might be. Sometimes it is just level setting to say, is this a priority for the organization? And I think a lot of the organizations, especially after George Floyd's murder last year, put out statements and were saying, we really care about this stuff. And then what happens is the organization, the people within the org, members, staff members, need to hold the organization accountable to following through. Say, it's great, anybody can put together a press release. Show me, don't tell me. And I think what we can do as individuals to help our organization leadership is to work with them on what those accountability measures might be. A lot of the work I'm getting to do, and again, this is part of that career journey, I'm doing a lot of strategic planning for organizations and implementation plans, because I recognize that stuff like this needs to be at the very top of the strategy of an organization, right? And I would encourage everybody to push their organizations to ensure that it is a priority, either as a through line across all of the things you do, or as a standalone call out that should have accountability metrics. We're going to go from here to there. And as the organization, you need to decide what that looks like, what those numbers are. And some of it isn't going to be really easy to measure in a quantitative way. But the things like inclusion and the things we talked about, the sense of belonging, you should be measuring in the qualitative ways regularly. And so I just think, again, holding our leadership accountable and also offering to be there to help on their journey. Because I think, again, as much as we can offer our expertise and our passion, like as you're getting from me and from the colleagues here, I think it helps the organization think of it in an approachable way, that it's not some far off concept. It's like, this is important. You said it is important. Let us work with you to lay out the roadmap from where we are right now to that ideal organization, that leveled up organization that Heba mentioned earlier. Let me help you with that along the way. So that's a couple tips.
Yeah, I actually want to pick up from what Tim was saying, and I also go back to when I talked about culture earlier. So I wrote probably the most challenging article I've ever had to write for AAC a couple years ago, talking about going from diversity to inclusion to equity. Part of the reason why it was so challenging for me was because I spent days researching really trying to find organizations that were doing this and modeling it in all facets. And sadly, it was surprisingly hard to do that, not because there are not organizations out there that are not further along the curve than others, but because DE&I is so complex, it was interesting to see how some organizations were kind of winning in certain underrepresented groups areas, but not necessarily comprehensively, or that they were winning when it came to staffing, but they were not in leadership. So it's kind of, to Tim's point, there's so many intersecting things, and it's okay to not win in every area all the time, but as long as you have kind of a comprehensive strategy. But I think the common theme that stood out to me for those organizations that really actually were worthy of standing out is that they first started by making it part of their ethos, right? You can't, if to Tim's point, if you're saying you're standing up as an organization now, that this is going to be important to you, then I think starting to say, all right, well, it needs to be part of your mission, vision, and values. Because if it's not, then it's not part of your ethos and it's not important to you. I can't separate the two out. I can say, personally, this is important to me and not say that it's part of my identity. So I can't do that as a person. I don't think organizations can do that in function. So that might be a place where organizations have to start. Your association might have to look at it. And I want to actually, I'm proud that, you know, my professional industry organization, NAIF, the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors, they're a great example of having just gone through an exercise of doing a brand new business plan where DE&I was highlighted, not just as something they were going to go about doing, but as part of the mission, vision, and values. So that way it was, you could see it thematically throughout their entire plan. And then the strategy that was a course corollary to that plan carried that through even further. So that way there are ways to measure it, to Tim's point. So I think that, you know, that's a hard place to start, because that is a really challenging conversation to have when organizations it's much easier to kind of get into functional areas and do things without necessarily solving the core issue. But I think we hopefully can all try to push our organizations to really say, look, let's actually start from the right place, because then when we go to functional areas, or we go to move the needle, or we go to measure our success, we'll be doing it from the right place, and we can get everybody on board with it, not just assign it to somebody or say we've got a DE&I specialist, or we create this new position and put somebody into it and that's it. We know, we've seen that that's not going to work anymore.
I think Tim and Brian gave really great advice. And I'm going to just take from Tim's story that he shared, where he kind of took the initiative in a lot of spaces and tried to move the needle. And I think that's really important. And so with any, like, and I'll take it from the young professional perspective, with anything that you do, I think it's really important to build a strong network, right? So you have that strong network, you come into the organization, you understand the power dynamics, but also who everybody is, how they can help you and how you can help them back, right? You understand that. And then we keep talking about the seat at the table. If you don't have a seat at the table, then you create your own table, right? And I'll give you an example. So my last two associations ago, I was in a really small association, and we had a member-facing D&I initiative that we ramped up and made into this IDEA idea initiative. And it was like, we wrote about it, it was all out there, but we didn't have a staff focus. And there were only 35 employees. So I was friends with everybody in the organization, right? And I was like, this is a problem that we don't have an internal staff initiative, right? We're talking about it externally, but we're not walking the walk internally. So I got together with our HR consultant. We really didn't have HR, but our HR consultant and one person from each of the departments that I had been really close with. They understood how I worked. I understood how they worked. And I put together a plan for launching an internal function. And then all of us together had a say in what the plan was. And then we went to leadership and we were like, this is a problem that we see. This is how we think you should fix it. This is how we can help. And this is what you should do to help us. And they invested $10,000 that first year to help us launch our first staff initiative. And it's still active even after I've left, because we built the foundation, we built the support, and everyone felt like they had a point in it and how to actually move it forward. So anytime you see a problem, take the network that you develop and then you figure out how to solve that. Bring your own table, create your own table, bring the people that you need together, and then you take it forth to leadership. And that's how not only do you move DE&I forward, but that's how you move your own kind of career forward and your own leadership skills and develop it, because you become the person who actually fixes problems.
Wow, that's really powerful. That's a really great way to think about DE&I moving the needle for your organization while engaging in really sound professional development. So those two things can happen simultaneously, and that's really good news for young professionals who are constantly looking to grow and advance. You can grow and advance your own career while you grow and advance your organization in the direction of DE&I. So I know we're getting down to the last few minutes here. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I guess we'll go out on some comments from each of you about sort of effectiveness. We've talked about how it's not just a position that, oh, we've hired that position, or we've changed that language, or we've updated this policy. Over time, how do we know that we're effective in the short and long term? And what are some signals that we can look for as professionals that can say, yeah, you're on the right track and you're making progress, or no, these are actually more roadblocks and hurdles? Do you guys have some examples of how we can measure that effectiveness in the short and long term when we're working through DE&I?
Sure, I'll kick us off here. I mean, part of it is once you do set those measures, be clear about how you're going to, well, be aspirational about what it will look like, and then, set how you're going to measure them. Again, I mentioned the qualitative surveys that don't always get the love they deserve, especially when it comes to some of the stuff like inclusivity. But I think it's so important. And as Heba mentioned, like it's important to retaining good talent for an organization. So I do think perhaps retention is an indicator of this stuff working. That if people feel like they are involved in, building a place that who cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion, both internally and externally, I think they're more likely, and the data will likely show that they'll stick around longer. And I think that's one indicator. And then I think by way of the function of organization, some of this is very difficult to kind of lay out. It's just you have an organization that is high performing. And again, I do think a lot of the data shows, Harvard Business Review show that high performing businesses actually prioritize this stuff. So your business will perform better if you prioritize it. And that's one way one indicator that things are working. But again, that was in the details in a bit, so that you really do need to set those up front, and then, hold yourself accountable to regularly track them, check in on them frequently to make sure that they are the right things to track. Because I think you need to be able to adapt to, adjust as need be to make sure it's, you're headed towards the right goal. So that's just a couple ideas.
Thanks, Tim. Brian, Heba, any final remarks on measurement?
I'll just add to what Tim said too. A lot of times we think that, we have to quickly fix all of these things, and it's because we're being reactive to what's going on around us. And I think the best way to make sure that it endures and it's long lasting and sustainable is to really think of it as a marathon. So it's not like DE&I is going to fix a problem and then it's going to be gone. Like it should be something that you're always making sure that you're looking through everything through that lens, right? And I think some really good ways to kind of start is to be really specific with what you want to fix. So my last organization, we were focused on underrepresented people in tech and making sure that we engage them and advance them in leadership positions. But then we got really specific. Who are underrepresented? Women and people of color. But then we got even more specific. Of those people of color, it was Black and Latinx at the entry levels, and then it was Asian Americans that were in leadership level, making sure they advanced in leadership levels, because that's where we were seeing the levels go further. And so the more specific that you are, the better able that you are to move things along and actually create things that are sustainable. They'll have to change, right, as you fix the problems and as new things happen. But if you have that specific kind of, this is our North Star goal, then you can always go to that whenever something comes up. And you just are always going to be working on it and chipping away at it little by little. And the incremental impact and the incremental change is just as great as the really big, impactful change as well. So all the little increments make that big, boom, change. That's not really inspirational, but just keep going at it and really try. And I think like the little baby steps and celebrate those small wins. Because it's such a marathon. It's not like it's physically exhausting, mentally exhausting, emotionally exhausting. And so don't think that you can change the world overnight.
I mean, I just want to build from both of those things. I think one thing is don't have the mentality of this is who we don't want to be. Have the mentality of this is who we do want to be. So don't go into just problem identification and all this stuff that we don't like. That's part of it, but you got to have the right framework, because just identifying and trying to solve problems doesn't get you to being different at your core, right? And we've said that, tried to say that several times. We've all said that. So decide this is who we want to be, right? And this is why we want to be that, right? Mission, vision, values. I think also, all associations have a strategic plan. And to me, that's such a great roadmap. Don't do anything, take what you have and say, okay, this is a framework we already have. How do we now need to apply DE&I to this framework? Because then when, like what Heba was saying, that then gives me an existing framework. I don't have to reinvent some kind of a wheel or whatever, but now I can look very strategically and specifically at functional areas and come up with strategies and think about the right parties that might need to be involved in this. And then I'm covering as many bases as I can, from membership engagement, from governance, from leadership, from professional development, you name it. That way, it at least gives you something to know that hopefully you're not going to miss anything. It is a long game. It's a long-term dynamic. We need to keep doing this until we're there, and who knows what there looks like. So let's just make sure we're all moving the needle.
One last point. I think that's such a big thing. And I think that being aspirational is such a big deal. And just remind me of this one thing when we launched the Delp Light program, largely talking to Mary Lou Murata, who's one of the best human beings in the planet. Congratulations on your retirement, Mary Lou. We launched it at the Fire Chiefs Association, and one of the chiefs that helped co-lead the program mentioned this thing up front that I thought about every time someone talks about a new initiative that's on the DEI front, internal, external, whatever. And it comes from the fire service. He says, you want to think about what decommissioning this thing looks like. When does DELP not need to exist anymore to say we must create this program proactively to elevate underrepresented groups? What does it look like when we no longer need it? Because we are already doing that. And we're already diverse, equitable, and inclusive in everything we do. And I just want to, again, plus one, all the aspirational aspect that they just touched on there. Think about that up front, to truly think about not just, of course you have to do the incremental steps, but how can you make a few leaps along that way? And I think I want to plant that seed for whatever your initiative may be, small or large. Just keep that in mind.
Well, guys, I know we're a couple minutes over, but I think it was well worth a couple minutes over. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your insights and your experience. You all come from such different places around our industry, and it makes a really big difference to all of us to have you here. So thank you so much for that. Also, thank you to everyone who joined us today and who's participating in this really important discussion. We hope you found something useful that you can take back to your associations and implement in your personal lives. Remember to follow ASA Young Professionals on all of our social. We also have a community and associations and ASAE's communities network, so follow us there. To stay up to date on all of our future discussions and our weekly Quick Bite Wednesday videos that come out on all of our social media, and then we combine those to have these kinds of conversations. We'll hope you'll join us next month for a live discussion with some speakers on how to live your life and work too. We're not going to talk about balance because we know that doesn't exist in COVID land, but it's some tips and tricks on how to live simultaneously next to your career. Our speakers next month are Jen McHatton, Natasha Bethia, and Thomas Cote. So thank you again to everyone for joining us. Thank you again to our wonderful speakers. We look forward to seeing you out there soon. Take care, everyone.